year after we left El Paso, I thought we were safe, settled, free. Then my daughter came home with a school assignment. Trace your family history. And just like that, the past found its way back in. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because we had tacos for dinner and Lucia always complains about how store-bought tortillas are an insult to abuelitas everywhere. She had her Chromebook open at the table, tapping away like always, until she suddenly stopped and looked up at me. "Mum, do we have any old photos of Grandma and Grandpa?" The question hit me like a dropped plate. I wiped my hands on a towel, pretending to think. "Why?" I asked too quickly. She raised an eyebrow. "It's for school. We have to do a project, like a family tree. Pictures, stories, where people came from. It counts as a history and a language arts grade." I nodded slowly, trying to smile. Let me see what I can find. But I knew exactly what she'd find if I wasn't careful. Nothing. I had erased almost everything when we moved. Not just for safety, but to start over without the ghosts. No framed photos, no heirlooms, no contact. I had burned the past in the name of peace. And yet, here it was, knocking again, not through my parents this time, but through my daughter. Lucia was 12 now, sharp-eyed, stubborn, too curious for her own good. Her room was full of sticky notes, with facts she learned, questions she hadn't answered, quotes from books she liked. She didn't forget things easily, she didn't let things go, and she was starting to realise that everyone else had something she didn't. Grandparents who showed up for school plays, baby albums with goofy smiles, stories of where they came from that weren't half-truths or edited versions. That night after she went to bed, I opened the hallway closet and pulled down a shoebox I hadn't touched in over a year. Inside were papers, a few old receipts, some ID copies, and one envelope I hadn't had the nerve to throw away. It was from my mother. A letter. Short, unclear. It didn't say sorry in the way that mattered. Just something like, "I know you'll never understand, but we did what we thought we had to." As if that was supposed to fix what she did. I held it for a long time, thinking maybe I should destroy it now. But something stopped me. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe some tiny part of me still wondering if I'd made it all worse than it was. I tucked it back into the box. The next morning, the envelope was on Lucia's desk. Open. She didn't say anything, just looked at me when I walked in, her expression unreadable. "You didn't write this," she said. It wasn't a question. I sat on the edge of her bed, feeling smaller than I had in years. "No, it was from your grandmother a long time ago." She nodded slowly, folding the letter again like it was something precious. Or dangerous. "Why didn't you ever tell me more about them?" I wanted to say, because I was protecting her. Because some stories aren't bedtime material. Because there's no easy way to explain that the people who gave you life also nearly took your freedom. But all I said was, it was complicated. That weekend, I noticed Lucia spending more time on the computer than usual. Researching, copying down names, tracing something. She asked for a Gmail account to contact relatives. "Just family stuff," she said. I let her. I didn't realise then that she'd already found a name, Andrés. My uncle, my father's younger brother. The only one who hadn't completely vanished after the fallout. The only one who still answered calls, even if they were few and far between. He had stayed quiet after everything happened, never taking sides, just slipping back into his quiet bachelor life in New Mexico. Lucia sent him a message. He replied. When she told me that, I felt something tighten in my chest, a familiar pressure like before a thunderstorm. I didn't stop her. Not yet. I told myself maybe it was okay. maybe he was harmless. Maybe knowing one piece of the past would be enough. But deep down, I knew what was starting. The roots I tried so hard to cut were growing back. And this time, they weren't reaching for me. They were reaching for her. A week later, I came home early from a faculty training session and found Lucia sitting on the living room floor with a shoebox in her lap. The box was taped shut when we moved one of those nondescript ones we never unpacked because I couldn't decide if it should be saved or burned. She looked up at me like she was guilty, but not afraid. Her eyes had that spark, the one I recognised from Miguel, the one that meant she'd already gone too far to pretend she hadn't. She held up a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed at the edges, the ink slightly faded. I knew it instantly. My mother's handwriting. "You never told me she wrote you," Lucia said. Her voice wasn't angry, just hurt. I sat down on the couch, letting the silence stretch. "That letter didn't say anything worth remembering," I said. Lucia looked down at it again. "It says," she was sorry, "for something I wouldn't understand." That line. I remembered it so clearly because it had made me furious when I first read it. Not because she admitted fault, but because she wrapped it in a riddle. Something I wouldn't understand. As if her sins were too sophisticated for my comprehension. As if being her daughter hadn't made me expert in her games. Lucia reread it like it might reveal more under a different light. "What do you think she meant?" she asked. I almost said I didn't know. But that would have been a lie. I just didn't want to explain it yet. So I said nothing. Lucia didn't push, but she didn't let it go either. That night, after dinner, I saw her on her laptop tabs open with search terms like how to track family history and El Paso criminal records expungement. She was smart. She knew something had been buried, and she had enough of my blood to go digging. A few days later, Miguel told me Lucia had asked about Uncle Andrés. I hadn't spoken to my brother in nearly a year, but I knew he kept in touch with our father. If anyone could hand Lucia a curated version of history, it was him. I asked Miguel what he said. He shrugged. I told her he was alive. That was all. I appreciated that the restraint, the awareness, but it didn't stop her. The next week, she sent him a message on an old family email I didn't even know she still had access to. She introduced herself, explained the project, said she was trying to understand where she came from. He replied the same night. I only found out because she printed the email and left it on the kitchen counter, like she wanted me to see it. Like she didn't want to keep a secret, but also wasn't going to ask permission. His words were warm, casual. "Hi, Lucy. It's so nice to hear from you. You sound like a very thoughtful young woman. I'd be happy to tell you about our family." He talked about my childhood in broad strokes, the early years in Juarez moving to El Paso, how hard our parents worked, how proud they were of their grandchildren. Nothing about the red bag, nothing about the checkpoint. Just a soft, sepia-toned version of events where everyone tried their best and sometimes made mistakes. It was the kind of story kids could believe. The kind of story designed to make you question why your mother ever walked away. I stared at the printed pages for a long time. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I felt something deeper. That low, quiet panic of watching your child slip into a story you know is false, but still sounds better than the truth. Because the truth doesn't come with comforting timelines or framed photos. The truth is jagged, and sometimes you don't bleed until later. That night, after Lucia went to bed, I sat on the back porch and watched the neighbour's cat slink across our yard. Miguel joined me, handed me a mug of tea without a word. I held it but didn't drink. "She's talking to Andrés," I said. He nodded. I figured I don't know what to do. He took a breath. "You tell her the truth, before he tells us something prettier." And that was the moment I knew this wasn't about my parents anymore. This was about legacy, about who gets to shape the story that lives in our children's bones. I thought I'd buried the past, but it was already blooming in my daughter's hands. Andrés responded within a few days. Lucia waited anxiously for the email, checking my old laptop like it was a treasure chest about to unlock something sacred. When it finally came, she opened it while I was in the next room, headphones on her face unreadable from my vantage point. She didn't tell me right away. She waited until after dinner, when I was washing dishes, and she lingered behind drying forks that didn't need drying. "Did you know Uncle Andrés lives in San Diego now?" she asked casually. I nodded. "We used to be close." That was true once, before he chose silence over discomfort, neutrality over justice. "He said your parents had a hard life," she continued, "that they were just trying to get by, that sometimes people make bad choices when they feel trapped." I turned off the faucet. Water kept dripping from my fingers. I reached for a towel and didn't say anything. "He said that your dad used to read to you every night, that your mum made the best empanadas, that they loved you the best way they knew how." Her voice was soft, hopeful, like maybe she'd discovered something I hadn't seen, like maybe she was rescuing me from a version of the story I'd misunderstood. I wanted to tell her that love isn't always enough, that love doesn't cancel out manipulation, that sometimes the people who cradle you also carve into you piece by piece. But instead, I just nodded. "They weren't always bad," I said, and that was the truth too. But it wasn't the whole truth. A few days later, Lucia found a website. A blog really small, obscure, with a handful of grainy photos and typed reflections. It was maintained by someone who had volunteered at a community rehab program in El Paso. There, among the posts, was a photo of my father, sitting in a circle wearing reading glasses, holding a copy of a book I used to love as a child. The caption read, "Mr. Ernesto Cruz sharing wisdom during Tuesday's literary circle." Another photo showed him smiling with a group of men, each of them holding slips of paper with the words, "Today I choose better." It made me nauseous, not because I didn't want him to change, but because I wasn't sure if he had, or if he just learned how to perform change. Online, he looked like someone's kind grandfather, a man who'd made mistakes but now handed out advice like hard candy at a Sunday service. Lucia printed the photos. She pinned them to her corkboard. One afternoon, I found her writing something under them. Words I couldn't see, but the posture told me everything. Reverent, careful, like she was building a shrine. "Did you find that yourself?" I asked. She nodded. "He seems different now," she said. People can grow, right?" I didn't answer, because yes, people can grow, but they also get better at hiding the parts that hurt others. And redemption, without reckoning, isn't healing, it's erasure. The real confrontation came the next week. Lucia had asked if she could email him. Just one note. Just to say she was glad he was doing better. I said, no, not yet. Not without knowing more. She slammed her door that night. And when I knocked gently to explain, she yelled, "You just don't want me to love them. You want me to hate them like you do." The words cut deeper than I expected, because it wasn't hate I'd chosen, it was distance. It was protection. And the fact that she couldn't tell the difference made me feel like I'd failed. We didn't speak the next morning. She left for school early. Miguel offered to talk to her, but I said no. This was mine to fix. Or not fix, just face. That night, I sat outside her door with a cup of tea waiting for her music to stop. When it finally did, I knocked once. I don't hate them, I said through the wood. I wish I could. It'd be easier. But love without safety isn't love, Lucia. It's a story that asks you to bleed quietly so the people who hurt you don't look bad. There was no response, but the music didn't start again. And in the morning, the photos were still on the board, but the captions were gone. That night, after Lucia had gone to bed and the house settled into its soft clicks and hums, I stood in the kitchen staring at the photos she'd printed out. One of my father, sitting cross-legged with a book in his lap, glasses low on his nose like some wise elder. Another of him smiling next to a counsellor captioned, "Even broken people can heal." I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching myself shake with a rage I wasn't allowed to show. Miguel came in barefoot, holding 2 mugs of tea. He set one down in front of me without saying anything. He'd learned this rhythm well. Let me go quiet first. Let the silence bruise before we pressed it. I took a breath, still watching the images. What if she thinks I'm the villain in all this, that I'm the one standing between her and something that could be love? He sat across from me, slow and steady. Do you think that's what she believes? I don't know. She doesn't say it, but she doesn't have to. I paused, tracing the edge of one of the photos with my fingertip. She looks at me now like I'm hiding something precious just because I'm scared she'll drop it. And maybe I am. Elena. Miguel said softly but clearly, "You are hiding something." That stung more than I expected. I looked up sharply. "But not for the wrong reasons," he added. "You're not trying to erase the past. You're trying to protect her from it. The question is, does that protection help, or does it just make the truth more dangerous when it finally shows up anyway?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. I just knew that every day the silence got heavier. Every question Lucia asked chipped a little deeper into the wall I'd built. And now she had Andrés, and pictures, and poems, and letters that painted a version of our family where damage was beautiful and pain meant depth. "She's 12, I whispered. "Too old for lies, too young for the full truth." Then maybe she needs enough of it to build her own sense of balance, not our versions, not theirs, hers. I wanted to believe that, but my memories weren't neutral. They didn't come in gentle tones and soft lighting. They came with bruised trust and nights I couldn't sleep, with the red duffel bag and the checkpoint that almost changed everything. "If I tell her everything," I said, "what if she hates me for keeping it from her this long?" Miguel reached across the table and placed his hand on mine. "Then she learns something deeper than what happened. She learns why people protect the ones they love, even if it's messy, even if it's flawed. And if we don't tell her, someone else will. Someone with less truth and more agenda." I nodded slowly. The fear didn't leave, but it shifted, became less about being exposed and more about being honest. Because maybe this wasn't about vindication, maybe it was about prevention. Later that night, I stood at Lucia's bedroom door. She was curled up in bed, earbuds in, face soft in sleep. I wanted to go in. I wanted to shake her awake and tell her everything. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered through the crack, not sure if I was speaking to her or to the girl I used to be. "You deserve to know the truth. Not because it's easy, but because you're strong enough to hold it." and I went back to bed next to the man who knew before I did that silence could be its own kind of damage, that withholding love in the name of protection often just teaches fear. We didn't sleep much that night, but for once our tiredness didn't feel like defeat. It felt like preparation. The letter came on a Wednesday, tucked inside a legal envelope addressed to me, but bearing Lucia's name on the inner page. Miguel brought it in from the mailbox, eyes narrowing at the postmark. "Law firm," he said, holding it like something that might burn. I opened it in the kitchen, the kids upstairs doing homework, a pan of rice simmering on the stove. The tone was polite, official. Ernesto Cruz, my father, had been released early for good behaviour. He was petitioning the court for expungement, and part of the process involved gathering testimonials to support his rehabilitation. One section was bolded, "We believe a personal statement from Ms. Lucia Cruz as a direct descendant and a minor child with whom Mr. Cruz wishes to re-establish contact would significantly strengthen the case." I stood there, letter in hand, pulse thudding in my throat. Miguel read it over my shoulder, then sat down without a word. It wasn't just the request, it was the assumption, the certainty that they could reach through time, silence and geography and still touch us. That night, after we put the kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me, unable to touch it again. Miguel watched me across the rim of his glass. "Say something," he said softly. I shook my head. I didn't have words yet, only static, only the way my body felt like it had been rewound a decade back to the day I realised I'd been used as a mule, not a daughter. "He wants her to vouch for him," I said finally. "To say he's good, changed." Miguel exhaled sharply through his nose. "Of course he does. Who better to sell a lie than a sweet 12-year-old with no memory of what he did?" I looked at my husband. What if she believes him? What if she thinks I'm the one standing in the way of something good? It was my worst fear, not that Lucia would love him, but that she would see my silence as cruelty, my protection as control. "We have to tell her," Miguel said. "All of it. Not to shame him, but so she doesn't walk into the same patterns we barely escaped." Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the ceiling. Every creak of the house made me jump. My mind kept looping back to the letter, not the words, but the confidence beneath them. He thought he could rewrite himself. That time and paperwork and carefully worded apologies would make him a grandfather worth knowing. 2 days later, a second envelope arrived. This time addressed to Lucia directly with a handwritten note from a girl named Bella, her new best friend from school. Inside was a small, gift-wrapped box. I made her open it with me watching. A worn leather journal, a faded photo of me as a toddler, and a poem in Spanish that I recognised instantly. My mother's handwriting. It was a love poem she used to read to Ernesto in the kitchen when she thought I wasn't listening. Lucia looked at me wide-eyed. Bella said it came from her dad's uncle, Andrés. He said he found it when he was moving houses. He thought I might want it. I felt the floor tilt under me. Andrés, my father's brother, the only one in the family who hadn't cut contact completely, who still posted vague, scripture-laced Facebook updates about family and forgiveness. He had sent this, through his daughter, to mine. They'd found a way in. That night, I searched Ernesto's name online. His face was in 2 articles, one a small piece about model inmates starting book clubs, another from a local rehab organisation touting redemption stories. There, He was reading to a group, smiling softly. The caption said, "Former offender, now mentor." I wanted to scream. Instead, I closed the laptop and walked into Lucia's room. She was brushing her hair, the journal open on her desk. I sat on her bed. "Did Bella say anything else?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just that her dad said your dad used to read poetry. That maybe he wasn't all bad." I took a deep breath. "Lucia, I need to tell you something. About who he really was, about what he did." Her face changed, not frightened, just open, willing. And that almost broke me more. We didn't talk long that night, but when I left her room, she hugged me tightly and said, "Thanks for not hiding." I lay in bed, later the silence too loud. The letter still sat on the counter, unanswered. Miguel came in, lay beside me, his hand finding mine under the blanket. "We're not going to help him," he said. "Not in court, not in life. And if he keeps pushing, we push back legally, not emotionally." I nodded. For once, I didn't feel torn, just tired and clear. Because some roots don't just grow back. They look for cracks in your foundation, and if you're not careful, they'll tear it apart again. The letter didn't break Lucia, at least not in the way I feared. If anything, it made her quiet, focused. For a few days, she stayed off social media and read a lot real books, not just articles or quick searches. She asked fewer questions, said she had a headache, said she was thinking. And then one afternoon, she came home with a small box in her backpack. I didn't notice it at first. It wasn't wrapped like a gift, just tucked between a folder and her math homework. She waited until after dinner, after Miguel and Mateo had gone to the store, to pull it out and hand it to me. "It's from Paloma," she said. Paloma was her new best friend. They had met at the beginning of the school year and bonded over their shared love of graphic novels and terrible cafeteria pizza. I took the box and opened it carefully. Inside on top was a small journal with a fabric cover, faded flowers stitched into it like something from another decade. Underneath there were 3 baby photos of me. One where I was maybe 6 months old, wrapped in a blue blanket. Another, maybe 2, holding a wooden spoon with both hands like it was treasure. The third was me at 4, in a yellow dress I barely remembered, sitting on my father's lap. He was smiling, not posing, smiling. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper, a poem, not original, not signed. Just 4 lines in shaky cursive. "Some stories aren't told, they're planted. Some truths don't shout, they root. Some wounds are passed in silence. Some love forgets how to bloom." My hands were cold by the time I finished reading. "Where did Paloma get this?" I asked. Lucia shifted. "She said it was from her dad. Said he thought I should have it. That it might help. I didn't tell her anything, I swear." I sat down at the table. The room felt too quiet, like the kind of quiet that comes just before a storm. "Paloma's dad. He's Andrés' kid, isn't he?" Lucia nodded slowly. "I didn't know until today. We were working on a group project and her dad came to pick her up. He looked at me for a long time like he knew me. Then he told her to give me the box. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. I felt the burn of it down my spine. Ernesto hadn't just reached out with lawyers. He had sent a child, a cousin, a bridge, someone sweet and soft enough to carry his message past all the walls I'd built. I didn't blame Paloma, or even her father, not entirely, but I felt the manipulation all the same. "Did you read the journal?" I asked. Lucia shook her head. "I wanted to, but it felt wrong, like it wasn't mine to open first." I looked at the journal again. The stitching was frayed like it had been thumbed through often. I didn't recognise it. It wasn't my handwriting, not my mother's, probably Ernesto's. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the idea of reading his thoughts, or letting Lucia read them first. "You did nothing wrong," I said, "but I need you to know this wasn't just a gift. It was a message, and sometimes even kindness is used to open a door that should stay closed." Lucia didn't cry. She just nodded, her lips pressed tight. Later that night, when the kids were in bed, Miguel and I sat with the journal between us. We didn't open it. Not yet. We just looked at it like it might tell us what to do next. Like maybe it held the final piece of a puzzle we never wanted to solve. I didn't want to ban Lucia from seeing Paloma. That would only make her want it more. But I also knew we were back in dangerous territory. Back where love and manipulation looked too much alike. Where messages came wrapped in poetry and pain. The next morning, I slipped the journal into our lockbox next to the deed to the house and the birth certificates. I told Lucia she could read it someday, but not yet. Not while the people who sent it still thought they had the right to reach her heart through back doors. She didn't argue. She just asked quietly, "Will it always be like this?" I didn't lie. I told her the truth. Not always. But for now, we protect our peace, even from the people who think they mean well. In the following weeks, I began noticing subtle shifts in Lucia. At breakfast, she stirred her oatmeal like she was trying to hide her fork under the spoon eyes distant. At night, her door stayed open later than before, the glow of her phone screen painting the hallway in blue. She'd lie in bed with earbuds in, pretending to sleep, then close them sharply when footstep creaked overhead. On weekends, she cancelled plans with friends saying she had too much schoolwork. But her grades weren't slipping, her energy was. One afternoon, Miss Harper, her homeroom teacher, emailed me asking for a brief conference. I didn't think much of it until I sat in the small, white-walled office and saw how carefully the teacher avoided looking at the screen. She cleared her throat before speaking. "Lucia is a good student," Miss Harper began. Her voice was calm, careful, bright, curious, but she's showing signs of stress. Fatigue, irritability, withdrawing. She's asked fewer questions in class. She's missing things she used to volunteer for. I nodded, my throat tight. But what concerns me most is her project. She came to me last week asking if she could include personal details, family trauma in her report. I encouraged her to be thoughtful, but she cried afterward and said, "Maybe I'm not supposed to know this stuff." I swallowed. "Ms. Harper, I think she's torn between what she's been told and what she's starting to piece together." The teacher looked at me then, really looked, and said, "Your daughter is navigating two realities. There's the version she grew up hearing, simple, neat, protective, and there's the version she's discovering now, complex, messy, and not yet completed. That tension, it's painful. It can make a child doubt herself, her instincts, and it can make her feel responsible for reconciling both." Her words landed like soft stones in my chest. After school pickup, I asked Lucia if she wanted to grab ice cream, something light friendly. She agreed, but the whole time she stared at her phone. I offered a cone. She took it but didn't taste it. Instead, she fidgeted. Finally, she said, "Mom, do you think I should say something in my project about Grandpa?" I looked into her eyes and saw both determination and fear. I hesitated. "I think what you say matters. When you're ready." She nodded and looked away, as if she'd just dropped a pebble into a still pond. Later that night, I found her room deserted. The glow under the door meant she was awake. I knocked softly. She invited me in. She sat at her desk, the journal open, her school assignment tabs flickering. Mum, Miss Harper, said I sound like I don't know what's mine. And what's theirs, she said, her voice so soft it broke my heart. I feel like I'm being pulled between two stories about who we are. I knelt beside her. That makes sense, I said. It's normal to feel that way when the ground shifts under you. But you don't have to build the new story all at once. You can take your time. For weeks, we tiptoed around the subject, her questions, my answers, her silence. I began researching trauma-informed approaches for kids. I spoke with a counsellor. I asked for flexible deadlines if she wanted to delay the most personal parts of her assignment. We created signals, a sticky note on her door if she wasn't ready to talk, or a shared document where she could type out thoughts privately. One evening, she placed a note in my mailbox. I'm okay now. No detail, no apology, just enough. Watching her walk away to school the next day, shoulders a little lighter, I realised that protection had to be balanced with honesty. Because peace enforced by omission wasn't peace, it was postponement. And I didn't want Fidel to inherit our legacy of fear disguised as love. I didn't plan it. That night just unfolded. Lucia had gone to bed early, too quiet for a Friday. Miguel was watching something on his laptop, volume low, and I was at the sink pretending to care about the dishes. My hands moved through the soapy water, but my mind kept circling the same question. Was it better for her to live with a beautiful lie or survive an ugly truth? The house creaked around me like it was trying to join the conversation I wasn't having. I looked at the clock, 11:43 p.m. I dried my hands, walked to her room, and stood at the doorway. Lucia wasn't asleep. She was lying there, eyes open, blanket pulled up to her chin. Can we talk? I asked. She nodded. We sat on her bed, side by side, the way we used to when she had bad dreams. Except this time, I was the one who needed comfort. I started slow. You know that red bag from years ago, the one I never talked about? Her eyes didn't flinch. She just said, yeah. And so I told her. About the favour, the phone call, the long drive, the moment her father told me to turn the car around. I told her how scared I was when we opened the bag, how I couldn't breathe, not from fear of prison, but from realising that my parents had used me again. I described the silence in the car afterward, how Miguel didn't say, I told you so, just held my hand like I might disappear. I paused. Lucia was staring at her blanket, fingers twisting the edge. Did they know? Did Grandma and Grandpa know what they were doing? Yes, I said. They knew. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She just asked, why didn't you tell me before? That was the hardest part. Because I didn't want you to think love was dangerous. Because I wanted you to believe that family meant safety. And maybe, I added, because I didn't want to say it out loud and make it real. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked, did you ever think about cutting them off completely? Every day, but I always found reasons not to. They were aging. They were your grandparents. I thought, maybe they would change. Lucia gave a small, tired laugh. They didn't. No, they didn't. We sat there, the silence stretching between us. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, all the stories she'd built, the images of a kind grandmother, a misunderstood grandfather. She was dismantling them brick by brick in real time. Finally, she said, now I understand why you didn't forgive, but also why I still wanted to know who they were. I reached for her hand. She let me take it. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake thinking about how many versions of a story can exist inside one family, how silence protects but also deceives, how telling the truth doesn't always heal, but it always opens a door. The next morning, Lucia helped Miguel make pancakes. She wasn't chatty, but she wasn't withdrawn either. After breakfast, she folded laundry without being asked. Then she walked to her room and closed the door. I stood outside for a minute, wondering if I should knock. I didn't. Later that afternoon, I found her journal left open on the couch. I didn't read it, I wouldn't. But I saw the title of a page written in careful pen, "What Love Shouldn't Ask You to Do." Watching her walk away to school the next day, shoulders a little lighter, I realised that protection had to be balanced with honesty. Because peace enforced by omission wasn't peace, it was postponement. And I didn't want Fidel to inherit our legacy of fear disguised as love. When she came home, she hugged me. Not tightly, not like in a movie. Just a short, grounding hug. It was enough. Enough to know that even if she hadn't forgiven me for hiding it all, she'd understood why I did. And that was more than I expected. The letter came on a Tuesday. No return address. Just our last name written in careful cursive across the front cruise. Miguel found it in the mailbox and brought it inside like it was just another flyer. But I knew the moment I saw it. That sinking, electric kind of knowing that starts in your stomach and spreads like a fever. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside were 3 photos. One of Lucia sitting on the bleachers at her school's soccer field, hair tied back cheering for a friend. One of Mateo digging in the sandbox at recess, his red jacket bright against the pale sand. And one of all 4 of us taken from behind, walking out of a grocery store. You could see Miguel's arm around my shoulder. You could see the kids mid-laugh. None of us were looking at the camera, because we didn't know there was one. I dropped the photos on the table. My hands felt cold. Miguel leaned in, scanned them, then looked at me. His jaw was tight. "We need to call it in," he said, already reaching for his phone. The police came that afternoon. They took statements collected. The envelope asked all the standard questions. Did we have enemies? Did anyone know our previous address? Could this be a prank? I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I sat still and answered. No, yes, maybe. The officer's face didn't change when I told him about Ernesto, about the past, about why we had left El Paso. Maybe it sounded too dramatic. Maybe it sounded like fiction. But it wasn't. When they left, Miguel locked every door. We installed a new camera system that night. Sensors on the windows, a motion light for the backyard. The kids thought it was a safety upgrade, something normal, and maybe it was, for them. But for me, it was confirmation. Confirmation that even after everything, he still thought he had the right to watch us. That his exile wasn't a sentence, it was a waiting room. He hadn't changed. He had just paused. And now he was pressing play. I sat on the edge of our bed long after the kids had fallen asleep, the photos spread out in front of me. They weren't threatening in the traditional sense. No words, no threats, just images. But that's what made them worse. It was the watching that chilled me. The quiet message, I see you. I can still find you. Miguel came in and sat beside me. He didn't speak, just put a hand on my back and left it there. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying every school drop-off, every trip to the park. Had I missed a shadow? A car parked too long. A man in sunglasses who lingered near the playground I didn't know. And that uncertainty, more than any threat, was what broke me. In the morning, I emailed Lucia's principal, asked if I could remove both kids from the yearbook and online class lists. She understood, didn't ask questions. That was the thing about mothers, we recognise each other's silences. A week passed, then 2. No new letters, no strange cars, no signs. But the tension never left. I started looking over my shoulder in grocery stores, checking the mail like it might bite, watching my children's faces for signs of fear they hadn't learned yet. And then one night, as we were brushing teeth, Lucia asked, "Mum, do you think someone's watching us again?" I paused. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "You look scared again." I knelt down, met her eyes. "We're safe," I said, "and we're together. That's what matters." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Because somewhere out there, Ernesto was watching, not yelling, not showing up, just watching. And that was enough to remind me some people don't need a door to get in. They just wait until you open a window. We didn't wait this time. No more hoping it would fade or pretending it wasn't serious. The letter was still on the table next to Lucia's half-finished bowl of cereal when Miguel started looking up lawyers. I stood behind him, arms crossed, not out of defensiveness, but to stop myself from shaking. This wasn't fear. This was something colder, sharper. We weren't going to run. We were going to respond. The firm we found specialised in harassment protection and restraining orders. Miguel handled most of the call, explaining in calm, clipped words the sequence of events, the past conviction, the early release, the unsolicited contact, and now this letter, photos of our children, taken without our knowledge. I watched his fingers tighten around the phone. Watched the way he said, "my daughter," like it was both a shield and a vow. Within a week, the documents were drafted. They weren't flashy, just formal, clear, legally binding. A cease and desist. A declaration that any further contact from Ernesto or Andrés would be considered a violation and met with immediate legal action. We signed them together at the kitchen table. Lucia watched from the hallway. She didn't ask to read them, but later that night she came to me with her own letter. It was written in pencil, folded twice. No envelope, just a piece of notebook paper frayed at the edges. I read it alone after she'd gone to bed. "Dear Ernesto, I know who you are now. Not just what people say, but the things you did and didn't do. I know what my mum went through because of you. I know how she hid it to protect me. And I'm sorry if it hurts you that I found out this way. But you don't get to ask me for anything. You're part of my history, but not my future. Please don't write again, Lucia." I didn't cry. Not because it wasn't painful, but because it was so clear, so sure. And for once, I felt like the cycle had cracked. Not ended, maybe, but cracked enough to let in something honest. We included her letter with the legal notice, sent one copy to Ernesto's lawyer, one directly to Andrés. No explanations, no calls, just facts and a folded piece of paper from a girl who should never have had to learn how to draw her own lines. After the papers were sent, we didn't speak of it again for a while. Life resumed in its quiet rhythm. Mornings of toast and forgotten lunch boxes. Soccer practice, homework complaints. Lucia seemed lighter, not always happy, but less fragmented. I caught her once rereading her letter, not with doubt, with resolve, like she needed to remind herself she'd done it, chosen the boundary. That night, I told her something I hadn't even told myself out loud. "You don't owe anyone forgiveness," I said, "especially not someone who used your love like a tool." She didn't respond, but she leaned her head on my shoulder. Just for a moment. There's this idea that families break suddenly with shouting or slammed doors, but ours didn't. It broke the way ice does in spring. A slow cracking, invisible at first, until one day everything shifts, and you realise you're standing on something that can no longer hold your weight. And so we stepped off it. Lucia wrote another letter, not to send, just to keep, a version for herself. It sat on her desk beside a small framed photo of her and Matteo laughing mid-spin in the backyard. For my history project, she said, it won't be about them, but I want to remember what I chose. She titled it, The Line That Protected Me. I smiled, not because it fixed everything, but because it meant we'd stopped pretending it wasn't broken. After I heard that voicemail from my mother, her voice trembling when she said, she'll hate me if she knows the truth. But at least she'll be alive. I didn't feel compassion or forgiveness. I felt something else, clarity that even fear can feel like love when it's twisted enough. That was the moment I realised I didn't just need to protect my daughter, I needed to rebuild myself. So I did something drastic. On a Monday morning, I sat at my laptop and hit publish. The page was clumsy at first, just a title, rebuilding after betrayal, and a microphone start button. But that modest post became Angela's Voice, a podcast where I shared my story, not to shame my family, but to offer permission to feel pain, yes, and also to survive it. I talked about boundary-drawing emotional control, disguised as love-carrying bags you never asked for. I spoke about the day I realised I'd been used, and the day I realised I could choose differently. The first week, only 2 listeners. One was Miguel, who sent a text proud of you. The other was a woman in California who wrote, your words brought tears I didn't know I had. That was enough to keep me going. Soon, I organised a small online workshop. Family and forgiveness a map, not a mandate. Over Zoom, women from all over Texas and beyond joined in. There was Rosa, whose mother gambled away their savings and yet asked forgiveness with dazzling generosity, and Marisol, who'd grown up the responsible daughter, always cleaning up after siblings who refused to grow up. In the chat came messages like, I see myself in your story, I'm done apologising for self-protection. You're telling what I couldn't say. Gradually, emails arrived from listeners asking, can you help me draft boundaries with my parents? Or do you offer coaching? I started a monthly virtual support group, women talking to women in real time, heart to heart. The Boundary Collective, I called it. In our first session, someone read, I used to think love meant obedience. Angela, you showed me it can mean choice. There were tears, yes, but also laughter, also relief. Through all this, I found shards of myself I thought were gone. Confidence crept back quietly, gently. I began staff training for other small organisations, sharing how to talk to teens about family secrets, emotional safety, inherited trauma. One school counsellor messaged, your episode saved a student by helping her name her fear. That felt less like an echo and more like solidarity. I kept recording. I shared clips from the original voicemail, just the sound of my mother's voice, unedited, no commentary, so listeners could feel what I felt, fear wrapped in regret. And with every upload, the numbers rose. Not to fame, just to presence. I saw women write. My mum left me a voicemail like that, but I didn't know it until I heard it through your voice. You gave the truth a scaffold to stand on. I've stopped being afraid to be angry. Meanwhile, at home, Lucia watched quietly. Some nights, she sat beside me with earphones in, listening to episodes I posted weeks ago. Once she asked, can I make one? Mine could be called Roots I Didn't Choose Roots I Felt. I nodded. If she ever did, I'd build that mic again for her. At a year mark to celebrate the podcast's anniversary, I organised a one-day in-person meetup in Austin. A few dozen women came. we shared meals and stories in a rented park hall. One woman stood and said, "I taught my daughter to say no." For the first time, she looked at me and said, "Thank you." Others hugged me afterward, thanking me for shining light into what they'd normalized as darkness. Every time someone told me I changed a life, it hurt in a good way. Because who was I, a former mum, carrying other people's hidden bags to be asked for help? But that was the crux of it. Survival doesn't just lead to healing. It can lead to giving, to swinging that flashlight so others don't stumble in the dark. Finally, lying in bed one night, I realised it. I had spent so long apologising for my story, telling it quietly, ashamed, until I learned it wasn't shameful. It was real, and it was mine. And because it was mine, I could share it without regret. Not to justify, but to clarify, yes, I carried burdens. But I no longer carried them alone. From that point, Angela's voice became more than a podcast. It became a lifeline, a network, a quiet revolution. A place where women learned that boundaries are brave, that your voice can be soft and powerful, that silence sometimes saves, but speaking sets you free. Lucia sometimes said, half joking, "One day I'll be interviewing you on your show." And I believed it, because trauma might echo through a family, but so can repair. And because my daughter learned this much, her story wasn't an inheritance, it was a choice. And if you're listening to this, sitting quietly in your car, or walking through your neighbourhood with earbuds in, or maybe folding laundry late at night because that's the only time you get to breathe, this part is for you. You are not alone. There are so many of us carrying histories we didn't choose, holding silence like it's the only language we ever learned. We get told to forgive before we even understand what was broken. We're expected to protect legacies that never protected us. And still, we keep showing up. For ourselves. For our children. For a different ending. In the past few years, I've seen more women start over than ever before. Women leaving family group chats, changing their numbers, saying no to reunions that once felt like obligations. Women choosing therapy over tradition, honesty over harmony. Women starting podcasts, journaling through grief, posting truth in quiet corners of the internet that echo louder than applause. Not because we hate where we came from, but because we're finally brave enough to define where we're going. And I want to say this clearly, choosing peace doesn't make you ungrateful. Choosing distance doesn't make you cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your kids, for your future self, is to stop bleeding for people who never learned how to hold you gently. So if this story reminded you of your own, if it touched a bruise you've tried to hide, just know you're not broken. You're rebuilding. And that work, that quiet, daily, invisible work, it matters more than you know. If you want to keep walking this journey with us, you can subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the idea that healing is possible, that telling your story isn't betrayal, it's survival. And survival in all its forms is worth sharing. Drop your stories in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it.